Well, welcome everybody. My name is Latecia Yarbrough. I'm founder of iRise Wellness, and we have a lovely guest with us today. If you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Paige Gaines, also known as Sane Jane, and I am the founder and CEO of 911 Sane Jane.
Lovely. So today the topic is wellness, and we've had some lovely conversations pre this recording, but I would love for the people to know who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I have been born and raised here. I'm one of few. Everybody that's here now is like, oh my God, you're actually from Atlanta. I have not heard of it before. So yes, I am a native. I am 31 years old, and let's see, a fun fact is that, oh gosh, I mean, honestly, my life surrounds mental health. So I'll just say that I'm obsessed with it. I'm a mental health activist and I'm a peer specialist as well. So I get to work with individuals one-on-one that have mental health challenges, where I personally share my own lived experience and we walk through different coping skills and things like that. In addition to just working in the community and providing education and resources to the Black and Brown community.
Yes. And how can people find you?
Yes, so it is actually the same thing across all platforms. So it's 911 Sane Jane. So SaneJane. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. So I'm everywhere.
Ooh. You touching all the points.
All the platforms, I'm right there, and it's the same tag. So if you just Google it, you'll see everything.
Yeah. So tell us about your wellness, your mental health journey.
Yes, so it has been a long journey. I've been living with mental health challenges since I was about 10 years old. I had very, very intense anxiety and depression, suicidal ideations and attempts. And then I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 22 years old. So all of those years of being a child and a teenager, I just kind of kept quiet for the reason of I don't really have a reason to be sad, right? Like I go to a great school, I have clothes on my back, I have food, and I have a house over my head. And that's what we're taught, or that's what I was taught. It's like, why are you sad? Because you have everything that you need. When in reality, I had other challenges that were going on. So then once I was diagnosed, I really ran into a lot of challenges of finding resources that fit me and fit my needs and my wants and everything that I needed to get into recovery. So the years following that, I struggled just with self-medication, bad habits, just a very wild lifestyle while still having episodes of mania and depression. So it has been a trip to say the very least, but I've been in recovery going on 6 years now. So it feels good to say that, but I believe working in the community and helping other individuals is really what allowed me to stay in recovery and to even want to be in this space.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking about the ways that the resources, you are one of few that looks like you. So can you talk about what it's like to be a Black woman in this world with navigating some mental health issues?
It's very, so I like to place myself outside of the mental health field. I'm working in it and then being in this community, I have found a lot of connections. I've met a lot of Black therapists and things like that. But if you take a step back and look at the numbers, it's less than 10% of mental health and it's honestly probably about 6 to 7. I don't want to get the exact number wrong, so we'll stick with less than 10% that are mental health professionals that are Black. And so that is just like, oh, wow. So it can be quite lonely if you're not working in the mental health field. But I do believe practicing advocacy definitely helps, finding your own voice, feeling comfortable in that voice at your own pace, of course. But I really had to make that decision and say, you know what, I matter, my story matters, and I'm not the only one. And coming out and sharing my story definitely provides comfort and eases that feeling of, you know, feeling by myself. But I think the most challenging space would probably be in the work field, like the workspace is probably one of the most challenges, biggest challenges.
Yeah, I find myself, I think I was telling you, like, I didn't find a Black therapist until I was 29 years old. And how much of a difference those conversations are, being able to relate real life, cultural references and therapy sessions that I just don't need to explain. And how, so like, so setting that is, it's almost like you're speaking with your own family. But not everybody has that when they're navigating their own mental health, and finding that less than 10% is challenging. As an activist, how do you what are some of the target areas that you focus on when you're talking about your mental health?
Well, that's a great question. So I really like to hone in on being proactive, right? And not mostly like focusing on a mental illness. So if I'm asked questions about my diagnosis and details of that, I definitely provide it. That's not an area that I'm scared to go into, but I prefer to talk about how can we be proactive with our brain health. Right? Like, what are some exercises that we do for our brain? The same way we exercise for our body, and I love to compare it to physical wellness, like we can do those same things for our brain. So, meditating, writing, reading, all of those are mental health activities to where you're, giving yourself that space of recognizing what emotions you're feeling, recognizing how to process that. You're allowing yourself to be proactive with your mental health. If you find yourself sad more than 2 to 3 days and it's affecting your everyday life, and you're like, oh, wow, like I'm depressed right now. Like it's an everyday thing. What are some of the self-care things that we're doing? What are the coping skills that we're doing in that moment to assess? But being proactive and having that education allows you to recognize it when it comes up, right? So that's something I really, really like to talk about and I enjoy talking about is recognizing the signs. How can we work through them? But again, using that word proactivity is just definitely beneficial in the long run. Like it's so many benefits to that. I could use this entire time talking about that.
Yeah, and I think that is some of the things that, as I gotten older, before, I mean, I'm in my PhD program, so yes, I read a lot, but like when you actually get an opportunity to read for fun, like read for just, luxury, you're writing or you're doing a Sudoku or something like that, just for your
Mhm.
brain, like how relaxing that is. And what the real purpose when we're talking about self-care, and how important it is, and the aspect of everything that's happening around us. I was spending time in my current writing of my dissertation, and I talked to the point of being Black in America, and how there's everything around us that is can be traumatic. Thinking about the history of what it means to be Black, thinking about the resources that we lack because of the communities that we are a part of and we live in, to like the everyday trauma of what we see on social media and on the news of the attacks on Black and brown bodies. When you're talking about being proactive, what are some tips that you can provide for people that they're seeing this every day? And it's not, they're dealing with their own, but they're also dealing with their community around them. How do you cope with that?
I would say the first thing would be to really recognize what you're allowing, like what your intake is, right? So we can start with social media. We'll start with the obvious. Um, I know when takeoff passed, it was like videos passing around of the actual incident and things like that. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine, and she's like, yeah, like I went down a rabbit hole trying to figure it out. And I'm like, that's so unhealthy, because you're just taking in so much trauma. Like you're just bringing so many things into your brain and you're not necessarily aware of how it's affecting you. So being aware of what you're allowing your brain to process, what you're allowing to actually come into you, whether you have control of it or not, I think finding the areas where you do have control is definitely beneficial. But my favorite tip is, what do I wake up to and what do I go to sleep with? Right. So my phone is on do not disturb from like 10 p.m. to probably about 7:30 a.m. And during that time, my nighttime, I like to meditate and I like to read. But I'm aware of what I'm putting into my brain, because that's what's happening when you go to sleep. You're processing whatever that last moment is. I don't watch TV prior to going to bed. And if I do, it has to be something light, but no social media before bed, just a lot of things I don't want to take in. And then in my morning, I don't touch my phone until my do not disturb is off, because I want to be aware of what I'm putting into my brain before I go into my day. So whenever we have that form of control in the areas that we can grab it, because many things we don't have control over, I think it's definitely beneficial. And if you do it consistently, you'll recognize that those coping skills become natural. And you're like, you know what, that's not necessarily good for me, but because I don't have control over this situation, I can do A, B, and C to ease the trauma. I can do A, B, and C to ease this trigger, and know how to really handle it. So I would definitely say being mindful of what you are putting in your brain and what you're allowing yourself to process.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, I do that. I do that too. Oh yeah, I'm good here.
Yeah.
And then there's some things I need to work on, right? Because I like to wake up with God, and there's a lot of times where people sent me night things the night before, and I'm on social media before I spend my time with God. So I think those are important. Your night, who you wake up to and who you go to sleep to, like the things that you put into your mind, because it also helps your sleep.
Yes.
Yeah, it also helps with your dreams.
Yes.
If you're a person that has nightmares, what are you watching right before you go to sleep?
Exactly.
I think that's important. And thinking about like me coming from a diverse background, for like I have grandparents and aunts and uncles that are what we consider the majority, the white folks in the community. How do you help them understand, what does it mean to navigate your mental health? You kind of talked about your play and how that showed up. I would love for you to tell a little bit more about, what was people's kind of idea after that? What are people's thoughts after being able to see your play, and how to come up to fruition?
So, oh gosh. So the feedback from both our community and other communities was like, wow, this is very touching. This was a lot of information. It was quite heavy, but it was a necessary topic, right? But I believe that each individual left with something different, whether that be education and saying, you know what, my niece is kind of showing the same signs that you were. I wonder if I should have a conversation with her. Or a white mental health professional saying, you know what, I wasn't recognizing that I wasn't culturally competent and I wasn't connecting with my client. I was providing them with the service, which is totally different than connecting, right? So making sure that you're not just educating and assisting that individual, but you're educating that family member, you're educating that mom and that dad, because it's bigger for Black and Brown people. We're having to tackle the stigma outside of ourselves, right? So we can go to therapy for an hour a week, and learn these coping skills. And then when we go home, our parents are like, why are you meditating? What is that about? Right? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you speaking this mental health language that I personally don't understand? So that was very exciting for me when I started getting Black doctors, because they knew it wasn't just about me. They knew they had to take the approach of educating the family. And so with the play, we definitely emphasized how important that connection was for me in reaching my space of recovery. So I definitely believe that people walked away with that as well. And I think it just highlighted how, what's the best way to say it? It really highlighted the challenges that we're having to face. And it highlighted the lack of resources that we have, and that we want the help, right? We want to have that assistance. We want to talk about these things. And I always like to say is that we have the right to do so. If you go back to our parents' generation and our grandparents and our great grandparents, they did the best that they could. So they didn't have these conversations, right? They weren't able to discuss, like, today I'm very anxious and I don't think I can go to school, but now we have mental health days for kids and for adults. So I definitely believe the play opened up the conversation. It normalized some very uncomfortable topics. Despite whatever your background is, it definitely just pushed it pushed the envelope a lot. In the weeks prior to, my anxiety was through the roof. So I was like, how are people going to take this? We're really being blunt and
Yeah.
some of these topics. And it was based off of all of my journal writings going through recovery. So some days I was just angry and I just wrote whatever I wanted to. And some days were better than the other. But it being so raw, that's the perfect word. It was just very raw and authentic. It touched a lot of people in different ways. So I think those are a few of the takeaways.
I love it. And what was the name of your play? When's it come back around?
I know that's the question. It's like, when's the encore? So the name was XOXO Sane Jane, the play.
Mm,
Because that's how I finish all of my journal writings, which is XOXO Sane Jane. So we titled it that, which was really cool for me. And we're working on doing an encore, but it probably will not happen for the public until probably like May for Mental Health Awareness Month or July for BIPOC. But we're pushing it for youth. So we want to have for middle school and high schoolers in the spring.
I love that. I love that. And you kind of talked about I love as a resource because mental health, those services are expensive. And
Very.
sometimes even my insurance only covers a percentage of, my therapy sessions. Um, there's a lot of times where you have to pick and choose, especially with, things being more expensive right now, with gas prices being more expensive, food being more expensive, travel being more expensive. Sometimes people have to pick and choose whether it's their mental health or food in the refrigerator. What are some resources that you can provide them?
So my favorite, which I just got my approval for, a friend of mine sent a text, and it's called the I Love Foundation. And it was a Google form that took me about 60 seconds. And they will cover up to $120 of your therapy session, which is a lot, like a major, major difference. My therapy is quite expensive. So knocking it down that much, I'm like, I can continue. Like, this is relieving anxiety. But to your point of how do we make those choices of what do I sacrifice in order to make this happen? One of my biggest sacrifices was I knew that I function better when I have therapy. I'm my best when I have therapy. I'm making more money when I have therapy. I'm budgeting better. I have healthier relationships. So the long-term effects of it, I've learned how important it is and how critical it is in my personal journey. So I actually moved back home. I was like, you know what? I can save this money. I'm blessed enough to have this safe space that I can go to because I want to do therapy every week, which is a nice bill. And that was amazing. Like, I love my family, but making that decision was not easy. But being able to do so again was a blessing. And I know that's not many people's option, but I like to point that out because we do have to make sacrifices. So getting your nails done is like $150. Like, that's a lot of money. That's a therapy session. So I do press-ons now. So it's those little tiny things where you're like, okay, I have to, pick and choose. But I think if you compare it to your physical, if you needed to go to the doctor, you would. If you needed to buy a certain medication, more than likely you would make that sacrifice. So doing so for your mental health is just as important.
Well, your nails look great.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think making those sacrifices are things that brown and Black people are accustomed to. We make sacrifices for everything. And now that we are in this space of, now we've returned to work in certain spaces, and the boundaries or the lifestyle that we had working from home is different. And how do we create kind of a space for ourselves in our workplace to inhibit what practices we want to continue outside of our workplace?
Oh, wow. So I work from home, and in my office, I have a diffuser, I have a candle, and before I do anything, those are my two things that I have to get together. And then I love good sunlight. So having those basics in place, it definitely makes a difference. So creating your own special place. I kind of use my office for work and yoga and meditation. So it has multiple uses, but I love the idea of creating your own space. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be gorgeous. It can be your own, like it can be a corner in a room. But if you are in a workplace and you have a desk, making sure that you have positive affirmations, possibly making sure that you have pictures of family members that encourage you, whatever it may be. It can be tiny, tiny things. It's just like reminders. I saw a video of a young lady who had a picture of herself as a child. And she put it on her mirror and she's like, this is my reminder that I'm doing all of this work for the little girl who never had the chance to do this, this, and that. So just small things like that make such an impact. So whether you're working from home or you're in a workplace, I do encourage you to find those tiny, tiny things that are just small reminders.
I love that. I'm a person that lights a candle, opens up the blinds, like
Yes.
music in the background. Like that's how I just get started. Make sure that the space is clean. And those are things that I started doing that I didn't know that was a part of my own routine, but I function better and I'm more productive when I do those things. So yeah, that is so good. I'm thinking about also, you spoke to this point before, the importance of having people that support you on your journey and having people in your community that can also encourage you, but maybe call you out too. And then there's also times you have people that will tell you things about your mental health that is not encouraging or not supportive. How do you navigate that? And what would you tell folks to do as they are in that same kind of space?
I say the first thing, like the very, very, very first thing is learning how to advocate for yourself. So learning what your needs are, learning what your wants are when you're in like a good mental health space. And when you're not in a good mental health space, having that language to communicate is going to be your first step. So I'm a believer that it has to start with you first. Because if you can't say today I am feeling anxious and these are my triggers and I kind of need you to back up 50 feet because you are my trigger, It's kind of hard to communicate that and to get your point across if you don't have that language and if you're not personally aware. So practicing that advocacy of your needs and your wants would be the first space, and having that language to do so. That made a difference for me. I had to learn about my diagnosis. So I had to learn what mania looked like. I had to learn what depression looked like, what my anxiety looked like, and I had to learn my triggers. And the biggest trigger is the weather. So if it's too hot, I can go into mania. It's just all these different things. But I say that to the point of I had to communicate that to my parents. So saying, hey, today I'm manic. So I'm probably talking 100 miles per hour. I probably spent $150 on makeup for no reason. And I probably haven't slept in 2 days. These are things that you need to be aware of, but I'm aware of it first so I can communicate that. And I need you to call me out on it, just like you said. But I also need you to support me and have those difficult conversations with me. But when it comes to building out your support system and kind of figuring out who those people are, I find it to be helpful when it is reciprocated. So not just being the person that always goes to somebody, but also being that person where they can come to you sometimes, right? I have maybe a good 2 to 3 girlfriends of mine to where we check in with each other. And it's not an everyday thing. It's not always heavy, but it'll just be like a heart through a text message, like, hey, I'm thinking of you. And if it's very, very important and it's heavy, we have enough respect for each other to say, hey, are you able to take on what I need to talk about? So having respect for the other individual as well, it definitely helps reciprocate that support system. So finding who you're comfortable with, finding who you trust, finding somebody that is, again, going to hold you accountable. But again, I will always go back to that first step of learning the language and practicing advocacy.
Yeah, being very reflective about your own needs and mental health, and also like your physical health, because it also impacts, I feel like your mental, kind of what you're saying, when you take care of your body, you take care of your mental, like you're practicing those things, because they affect one another. I know when I'm not feeling well mentally, like my body doesn't feel well, and I'm not as, I'm pretty moody, right?
Mhm.
And that's something that I have to acknowledge about myself. Like I'm not in a good headspace. I can't take in what you're about to give me.
Exactly.
And that's okay. Sometimes we're in spaces where it's hard for you to say those things, and hard for people to say, like, and that's okay for you. Like, I find that when you find a good community and a village, what I say, and you all communicate with your needs, and your purpose, those things become so much easier. And like I feel like my my 30s are the best times of my life. And that, I'm 31, just like you. And when you finally get to know who you are and how to reflect about your needs and how to communicate, and those things become easier. Like those things that you were navigating in your 20s, where you're like, you dealt with manic, I dealt with like short temper. Like I'm an LA girl, and sometimes like you rub me the wrong way, and
Yeah.
I have the loveliest conversations with you. But as I gotten older, there's nothing more important to me than my peace. And being able to find that peace where I live, where I work, the community that I surround myself with. Um, and I also, there's a challenge with that. We are in a culture of it's like that cutoff culture, the throwing people away, the throwing people in the trash because you're disrupting my norm. Um, what would your challenges be for folks, especially knowing that people are navigating their own mental, their own physical, their own shit, right? To not just throw people away.
I would say taking a step back and knowing it's not all about you. I know when I'm in depression, I can become very consumed with Paige. And I have to take that step back because I'll say, well, she didn't call me today. She didn't call me yesterday. She's not asking me how I'm doing. I'm like, you know what? She may have her own things going on. So let me step outside of myself and say, hey, like just checking in. I hope everything is well. Not even getting into a deep conversation, but really recognizing that distance or that idea of cutoff and things like that. Like everybody has something. So again, I can become very, very, very so very involved with Paige when I'm depressed, and which is okay because I'm trying to tune in with myself, feel better, and things like that. But when it comes to the space of wanting to cut somebody off or being the individual that gets cut off, you have to sometimes recognize it's not about you. And when you stop taking things personally is when life becomes so much easier. And I didn't really get to that until I got into my late 20s and early 30s. And it's been heaven ever since.
Yeah, not taking it personal. I think that's still something that I navigate to this day. Someone called me fragile the other day, like, and I'm like, I'm a sensitive person and I take everything. I'm a person in a room that if everybody's feeling something, I feel it. Like I know that there's discomfort. I know when someone's sad. I know like, and I just feel it. I take in everybody's feelings and it can be so consuming. So I have to acknowledge that about myself, and really taking a step back and learning that those are their feelings and I don't have to take in that. I can ask about it and I can see if I can help. And there's sometimes I can't, right? And knowing that there's other resources that I can provide them to is 110% what I've learned in my 30s. Like I am not a licensed therapist. I cannot help you with all your things, but here is the person that can help you through X, Y, and Z. And sometimes we need to do that. Has that been hard for you as you're navigating your own things?
So I recently started a new form of therapy and it's called EMDR. But before getting into all those wonderful details, it's a great form of therapy. If anybody's listening right now, it's amazing. But they teach you to kind of recognize a space of trauma or a memory, but think of it as if you're on a train or like you're watching a movie. And so we were talking about it and I was like, I recognize that those emotions and those memories, I was very, or currently since like healing from it, I've been very removed, but not consumed by it. So it's like I'm genuinely watching it pass me by. And so I use that analogy because that is the approach that I have to take being in the mental health field. And we can go straight to the play. Afterwards, I was pulled to the left, and it was like my daughter had an attempt last week. And then I was pulled to the right, and they were like, I want to put your play into a middle school. And then I was pulled in another place. But I had to recognize, like, you know what? Removed, not consumed. So recognizing what's going on around you, but again, having those boundaries and having that space of not letting it consume you, because that's where the fatigue comes in. They call it compassion fatigue. And you're not able to be your best if you're pouring from an empty cup. And that's a phrase that we all hear, right? Which is, you can't give what you don't have, or don't pour from an empty cup, or whatever, like recharge yourself, things like that. It's very, very true. So that's something I had to learn how to navigate. But since coming up with that little phrase that just keeps sticking with me, I practice it now. And I'm like, okay, being removed and not consumed. So still being aware and recognizing that people have their challenges and so forth. I think you made the perfect point. I'm just a resource. Like, I don't claim to be a therapist. That's not a route that I want to take. That's a question that I get. Like, is that your future? Absolutely not. Like, no, absolutely not. There are too many rules. I like being Paige. Let's just stay in this space, stick in my role.
Yeah.
But again, knowing what you're capable of doing and providing those resources, I think is the best way to handle those situations.
I love that. And I'm also thinking about, a lot of people call me a conduit. And what that means is just, I love connecting people to resources, to other people and different things like that. And I find that that is just a knack that I have. And I don't want to learn something brand new. I gotta learn plenty more things. So yeah, I'm not gonna be a mental health professional. I can't do that. That's not my go-to. But I will be that conduit. I will be that resource for you to be able to connect you to where you need to go or to who you need to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So as we kind of close out here, I just want to see if you can leave somebody, what would be one thing if you had to tell, kind of like that, the lady you spoke about before, she had a picture of the young you. If you had to tell the young you something, what would it be?
I love you and I'm working hard to protect you when you felt unsafe.
Oh, I love that. And if I had something to tell myself, would be that you'll figure it out and everything will be all right.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Again, let the people know who you are, how to find you. This was so great.
No, thank you for having me. So I am, again, on all social media at 911 Sane Jane, and it's Paige Gaines and also known as Sane Jane. So all social, follow me, tag me, and just follow my journey.
Love it. And this is iRise Wellness, Latecia Yarbrough. Thank you.